I am live. I'm continuing with chapter 8 of Many Lifetimes. This chapter 8 is written by Kelsey, and it is about parenthood. I have already read the first part of it. I'm now in part 2. He describes the relationship of baby, mother and father. He is a hypnotherapist as well as is Joan Marshall Grant, and they are collaborating here in describing their findings and their method of working. So I'm beginning here with the second part of Parenthood. A drink with an office friend before setting off for home? Well, why not? She won't be finished with the baby before 7. The stag party next Saturday to celebrate Joe's promotion? Not a bad idea. I'm sure she won't mind. And almost certainly she genuinely does not mind, because at this stage she does not recognize the symptom for what it is, and nor probably does he. It is all so gradual. There's not the drama of his wife having become infatuated with another man, nor he with another woman, nor is she consumed with jealousy of the baby. But, perhaps barely consciously, he senses that the essence of the woman whom he married, because to be with her was the dearest thing in life, has withdrawn from him, and so again, scarcely aware of what he is doing, he is adjusting to life without that essence. Now, if both awaken simultaneously to what is happening, the situation can probably be rapidly restored. But too often one, if not, does not matter which one, recognizes it in advance of the other, and in the frightened, angry reproaches and ripostes, which are all too likely to ensue, the relationship between husband and wife may receive a blow from which it never recovers. To understand the ways in which parents may be vulnerable, it is necessary to consider certain psychological mechanisms, which, in varying degrees, are very widespread. Perhaps the most significant is the confusion between being loved and feeling indispensable. No man who really loved his wife would wish her to be unable to survive adequately if he were to die. Certainly she would be sad, for sadness at parting is the price of happiness in company. But he would abhor the idea that she was dependent on him, for love finds it difficult to flourish except in freedom. Dependency is a barrier against love. It may make it impossible for the wife to believe her husband stays with her because he really loves her and not merely from a sense of duty. She may hate herself on account of her dependency, but displays these feelings onto her husband, and so, quite irrationally, grow to dislike him. He, for his part, may fear that she only stays with him out of necessity. "You don't love me, you only need me," is a taunt often flung by a husband or wife in anger. A person who is loved will always be needed, but a person who aims at being indispensable is very unlikely to be loved. Yet, very many people, and often those who use the word love, most frequently have lost sight of its real implications, and rely upon the feeling that they are indispensable for an illusion of emotional security. It is a woman who is making this mistake who is liable to revel in the dependency of her child to an extent which endangers the link with her husband. When the child very properly becomes absorbed in learning to do things for himself, she may, instead of being delighted with his progress, interpret his increasing independence as a withdrawal of affection. The anxiety which she may then suffer is likely to drive her to become possessive towards her husband, thus causing their relationship to deteriorate still further. The father is likely to be vulnerable on a different score, through forgetting that his essential contribution was simply the sperm, which fertilized the ovum to which the incomer became attached. Obviously, the sperm carried certain genes which helped to make it possible for the supraphysical to construct this particular soma. And clearly this soma is an integral factor of the child's personality. but it is easy for the father to fantasize the child as an extension of himself, to a degree which is irrational and dangerous. The source of such fantasies lies outside his awareness, and is usually the unconscious extension of an attempt to make the child compensate for certain respects in which he has felt inferior. These fantasies may interfere with his objective appraisal of the child's potentialities, and cause him to see them through a haze of hopes and fears. When the child reaches a standard in any respect which is no higher than any dispassionate observer might have predicted, such a father can suffer a severe blow to his self-esteem. His own feelings of inferiority, of resentment against himself become inflamed, and all too probably will swiftly be transformed into a totally unjustified resentment of the child. This is particularly liable to happen if the child is slow to learn some skill in which the father takes pride and has been trying to impart. It is entirely justifiable to feel pleased if one has succeeded in teaching someone a skill which will add to their enjoyment of life, and if one has failed to do so, it is right to review one's technique as a teacher. But it is entirely unjustifiable to resent the pupil who happens to lack the basic aptitudes which would have enabled him to profit from one's efforts. A contrary state of affairs sometimes occurs, which is unlikely to become apparent until late adolescence. The child, when young, fulfills all his father's hopes, and his promise nourishes paternal pride. But if the time comes when the child is clearly about to exceed his father's attainment in a particular field, this promise may be seen as a threat, and evoke intense resentment. Such a deplorable situation will never affect the father, who has always recognized with innate personal potentialities acquired during a long history. Alternatively, the parents may unite against the child in resentment, which is unjust, and this shared resentment may become the strongest link between them. But as this link is forged from negative feelings, it can never unite them in positive affection. Parents who recognize that the basic attitudes of their child were acquired by his own efforts, and that he would not have been born to them or to anyone else unless at least some of these attitudes needed to be redirected, if not be supervised, when they find that certain aspects of his character are unlovable. But if they believe that this unlovability is either inherited through them or due to their ineptitude as parents, they will inevitably feel guilty and probably try to foist their guilt on each other. The needless guilt feelings of many parents would be substantially relieved if they could see their child with true insight. I've had many patients who initially presented a convincing picture of having been the victim of parents who were overprotective and dominating, or who rejected them, or who failed to teach them self-discipline. But as their stories unfolded, it became clear that the child with their dominating parents had been only too glad to be relieved of the necessity to think for himself, that the rejected child had merely been unsuccessful in claiming his mother's undivided attention, and that the discontented rebel had been a bully from the start. The time will probably come when the child leaves home to start life on his own. Ideally, the regret which the parents feel at his absence will be tempered by the fact that they are now free fully to enjoy the link between each other, which has been growing steadily stronger through the years. But for parents who allowed the child to be an obstruction to the development of their link, this may be a critical event. If the child has been the cause of frank hostility between them, he also served as something of a buffer. Now the buffer has gone, but the hostility remains. A somewhat similar result may ensue from a different cause, if the child provided a convenient target upon which the parent could project hostility that arose within themselves about each other, they will have been able to evade the real source of their hostility. But in so doing, they deprived themselves of the chance of resolving it, and with the disappearance of the target, are left with no one to snipe at but each other. If their interest in the child has constituted their principal link, they might find that when he goes, that they are facing each other almost as strangers. It's quite a long chapter. So I make this a second one. Almost as strangers. Unless they have the courage to admit the situation and in an urgent desire even at this late stage to start to create a true love relationship, they may very easily drift into separate lives, which have little genuine overlap. The difficulties which can arise from this are not going to be made easier as automation extends, giving people greater leisure and forcing down the age of retirement. It may presumably be served years before society has adjusted to the problems which this will create. The feeling of usefulness which a man derives from his job should be only one of the factors that contribute to his self-esteem. Of at least equal importance to him should be the regard in which he can justifiably feel he is held by his wife. Lacking this, when his job comes to an end, he must either quickly find some new way in which he can feel he is pulling his weight, or face a serious crisis. His wife will probably have contrived a way of life which at least gives her the illusion of being fully occupied, but he is unlikely to wish to share in her chosen activities, even if she wanted him to do so. Under these circumstances, it is not surprising if he develops a severe depression, and one which is difficult to treat. It may not be at all easy for him to find a satisfactory occupation, and one can neither truthfully reassure him that he is of vital importance to his wife, nor give him back the years with which he might have lived more wisely. If he avoids going into depression, he may, especially if funds permit, find some hobby, some form of activity which enjoyably occupies his time. But if he fails to do so, boredom or loneliness may cause him to form a sincere attachment to another woman. This would not matter any more than it would matter if his wife became attached to another man, if these two events occurred simultaneously, but they rarely do so. Thus, the one who is threatened with being left, faced with the prospect of loss of prestige, refuses to accept an end to the farce of their marriage, and instead of wishing the other a benign Godspeed, begins a war of attrition, which may persist until they are divorced by death. Well, I finished this here because it is a long chapter, so this was the second reading. Have a good Monday.